Hello, Dark Case family. Welcome home. In 1945 America, Barbara Kent was 13 years old. She was from New Mexico and had big dreams of becoming a famous dancer. The cinemas showcased talented movers like Gene Kelly, Fred Astaire, Judy Garland and Ginger Rogers. So why couldn't Barbara be next? The perfect opportunity arose for the teenager to further her possible career, and if not, to at least have the experience of a lifetime. Her dance teacher, a woman named Karma Deane, invited Barbara and 11 other of her students aged between 10 and 16 to attend a special summer camp in a rural cabin in Ruidoso, New Mexico. Barbara and all of the other girls were thrilled when they headed off to spend the summer with Karma Deane, known mainly to her students as Miss Deane. The dancing instructor was prominent throughout El Paso, with a reputation held in high regard, having studied under Edward Cancino, Rita Hayworth's father. Many of her students went on to fame too, dancing for the London Ballet at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and featuring in the golden age of cinema. So for Barbara and her dancing companions, it was to be a life-altering summer. And it would be just that, just not in the way the wide-eyed, excited students could have imagined. That summer, July 1945, in New Mexico, would be history-changing. Barbara was more than excited as she packed her cases, making sure to include all of the essentials she needed for her time away. The camp itself was nestled in an idyllic situation. Ruidoso Desert was serene, with cabins beside a river in which the girls would cool off and play around in, of course after a long day of dancing under the tutelage of Miss Deane. The landscape was described as alien by one of the campers who shared the cabin with Barbara. With the fierce heat of the desert by day, the girls often ended up dancing below a star-studded sky. It was a world away from the realities for them and their families, with the growing concerns of the ongoing war. With so much to do and their time occupied, they could, at least for a short time, forget their troubles and focus on dance without a care in the world. Miss Deane's schedule was a rigorous one, but the girls were over the moon to have their days filled with dance, all of them incredibly passionate about what they were doing. One of the campers described the talented teacher as tough, but they reflected that she made them believe in their dreams. And so the dozen danced and became friends, unaware that they were dancing on a nexus in time, a moment that would make history for all the wrong reasons. The rural isolation of the New Mexico desert had not gone unnoticed by other groups who were looking to scout a remote location, in particular a covert group of scientists, and these men and women of science shortlisted 8 possible sites, but they soon decided they'd found what they were seeking in Alamogordo in Los Alamos. This was about 50 miles from Barbara and her summer classmates. On the morning of July 16th, 1945, the exhausted girls who had had a busy weekend, engrossed in choreography, were woken up abruptly at 5:30 by a thunderous sound. It was a jolt sharp enough to throw Barbara from her bunk bed. The girls were immediately rushed outside by the frightened Miss Deane. The woman feared for everyone's safety. At that time, she assumed that the water heater must have exploded. Outside though, the girls couldn't believe their tired eyes. The campers looked around with their eyes squinted, recalling years later how the light was strange. It hurt their eyes, but it was somehow mesmerizing. At such an early hour, the sky should have been dark, but instead, it appeared from the window as though the sun had already risen. The sky was lit by an intense bright white light, a light so insanely powerful that it would later be reported. A blind girl living 100 miles away in Socorro asked her parents, "What was that?" Residents in surrounding areas all reported witnessing the same thing that morning, an intense burst of light, a huge engulfing cloud, and a strange, eerie sky. Several would later admit that they thought the world was ending. However, back at the cabin, once the heater was checked for damage, The girls went about their day mostly unconcerned. Perhaps it was just an earthquake or a tremor of some kind. But shortly after their rude awakening that morning, something even stranger began to happen. In the New Mexico desert, in the height of summer, snowflakes began to fall. This was something so strange yet so exciting to witness that the girls ventured back out to play in this curious phenomenon. Barbara would later describe the day as winter in July, recalling how she and her companions had danced and twirled beneath the flakes in glee, with some of the children even catching the white flakes on their tongues and others rubbing them on their faces. They were excited by the whole affair, but understood that something was kind of weird too. The snowflakes that were falling weren't icy cold. In fact, quite the contrary. They quickly noticed that they were hot to the touch. However, in their innocence and with no ability to Google the answer, they assumed that this was simply down to it being a hot July morning and nothing else. They didn't understand the reality of the situation as they danced in the snow falling from the sky and spent their day frolicking in the river as they had in the days before. Photos of the girls taken on that ominous day show the smiling adolescents happily playing in the ashes. The pictures show a 13-year-old aspiring dancer and a group of happy young people, all blissfully unaware of just how pivotal the morning's events had actually been, unaware that what had just happened meant that Barbara would outlive everyone at that camp, most of them by multiple decades. The explosion had been felt and heard by many, and some people quite rightly had questions. Civilian concerns were quickly put to rest when a commanding officer of the Alamogordo Air Base fed the press a convincing cover story. Barbara Kent heard the lies firsthand from the government officials the following day. Miss Deane took them all into a very crowded Ruidoso for the announcement. It was explained that the morning's explosion had been down to an ammunition magazine full of high explosives and pyrotechnics. The so-called dump explosion was the answer that everyone was looking for, and that story was pushed as a source. Everyone was told not to worry. Concerns faded away. While some people had doubts, Miss Deane accepted the cover-up as the truth, and so she and the girls headed back to their cabin to continue working on their routines, all without an inkling of what they, the surrounding water, crops, livestock and land had been exposed to. They had no idea of the danger that they were really in. They could never have foreseen the aftermath of the nightmarish health problems that would follow them all to the grave. A long time would pass before Barbara and her friends, or indeed any of those that lived in the surrounding towns, as well as everyone that witnessed the flash or felt the warm snow on their skin, would finally be told the chilling truth by the US government, a truth that had been irresponsibly denied by them for so long. On that fateful morning, moments before the girls at the summer camp were shaken from their bunks at 5:29 a.m. in Los Alamos, American theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer detonated the world's first atomic bomb in a test codenamed Trinity. Trinity was a poisoned fruit of 3 years of labor, where Oppenheimer served as a director of the Manhattan Project. The Trinity testing site had been chosen for its remote nature, but disgustingly, there were still thousands of people living within a 40-mile radius of the fallout zone, and there were thousands more beyond that who were also exposed to this fallout. Given the ongoing war and the secrecy of the nuclear weapons project, a decision was made from the top down not to warn or evacuate anyone. They were simply sacrificial lambs to the nuclear arms race. And now, almost 80 years on from the blast, these unlucky souls are now referred to as downwinders. The explosion was far bigger and brighter than Oppenheimer and its creators had imagined. The plutonium bomb was placed on top of a steel tower, and this structure was obliterated during the detonation. Only 3 of the 13 pounds of plutonium within the impulsion device actually went through the fission process. Much of the nuclear substance was simply made airborne. This was because the explosion was so much bigger than anyone anticipated. The reaction produced an immediate devastating heat, a heat that was 10,000 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and the cloud that it produced was estimated to have reached 70,000 feet, which meant it would have entered the Earth's protective ozone layer. So what chance did the ordinary, unprotected civilians like Barbara actually stand? Fortunately for Oppenheimer and the rest of his secretive Manhattan Project colleagues, the cover story circulated in local newspapers and quickly gained traction. It was clearly believable enough that very few suspected anything else. The newly tested weapon was deployed shortly after this event. It rained hell down onto Hiroshima and Nagasaki, both with devastating results. However, on home soil, the devastation would begin too. Health professions across the 78 surrounding towns and cities would soon start noticing a spike in new, terrible health issues. Tragically, just 1 month later, there were 35 reported infant deaths in Roswell, just outside of New Mexico, and in towns closer to Alamogordo, the numbers were higher still. Those living in ranches nearby watched in disbelief as their crops withered and the livestock that had grazed upon their land simply dropped dead. According to CDC reports, 5 years after the detonation, the radiation levels in hotspots remained dangerously high. This was largely because such a small amount of the plutonium had actually detonated, meaning that the rest went into the environment and the atmosphere, leaching into the soil and groundwater. As time passed, the effects of the atomic testing in Alamogordo still remained of concern. Cancer rates went through the roof. The hot snow that fell on that day was essentially pure nuclear fallout. Fallout that was caught on the tongues of the summer camp attendees and danced in as if an early magical Christmas miracle was occurring. Its effects were simply horrifying. Every single one of her fellow campers passed away before Barbara turned 30. This makes her the lone survivor. However, Barbara Kent did not escape unscathed. Now in her 90s, she may have outlived her fellow dancers, but she suffered lifelong illnesses, including several bouts of aggressive cancer, all of which she somehow beat.